we're going to move outside the United States now with this artist. This artist belonged to the post-revolutionary communist Mexican movement and defined a new identity through nature and artifacts. The artist is, of course, Frida Kahlo. Her husband was also equally, I think, as well recognized as Frida was, Diego Rivera. They just recently had a resurgence, I think, in popularity, in fact, last year. So why don't we hand it over to Sarah?
Hi, everyone. I love all of your backgrounds. I see some that we'll actually be talking about today. Let me close my camera so you can see which one I chose. This is called The Broken Column, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what it represents. But as you can see, she has a back brace on. Her spine represents this broken column. She's got lots of pins and needles in her body, and we'll talk a little bit about why that was. So yes, today we're talking about Frida Kahlo, who was born in 1907 in Mexico City to a German father and a Mexican mother. She was the third of four sisters. And at 6 years old, she developed polio and was bedridden for many months. She was left with a limp in her right leg. And her father actually encouraged her to play soccer, swim, even wrestle, which were all really uncommon activities for girls back then. Her family sent her to the National Preparatory School, where she was one of the only female students. And there she joined the Young Communist League and the Mexican Communist Party. In 1925, she was on a bus with her then boyfriend at the time when it collided with a streetcar, leaving her nearly dead. I read some accounts that said she had a steel handrail go into her hip and come out the other side, puncturing her abdomen and her uterus. So she was really lucky to be alive after that. When she was finally released from the hospital to finish her recovery at home, she began painting and finished her first self-portrait a year later, which I will share. So this is the self-portrait that she painted for her lover at the time, who was also on the bus. Following the bus accident, their relationship turned sour, and it's noted that he never visited her in recovery. He left the accident with only minor injuries, so he was really lucky. But she gifted this painting to him in hopes of salvaging their relationship, and it ended up working. But unfortunately, he soon thereafter had to move to Europe for work. So this painting was painted in the style of 19th century Mexican portrait painters, who themselves were greatly influenced by the European Renaissance masters. As AJ mentioned, Kahlo met Diego Rivera, a famous painter and as well a liberal thinker, actually when he was commissioned to do a mural at her school in 1922, a few years prior. They reconnected in 1928 and began a relationship together. He would follow him around the world for his work. They lived in San Francisco, New York, Detroit, wherever his work took him at that time, they would live. And he always encouraged Frida to work on her art as well. So here is a painting she did of the two of them. It is aptly named Frida and Diego Rivera. This was in 1931, a couple years after they were married. Kahlo exhibited this at the San Francisco Society of Women Artists, where they were living at the time. And this painting depicts them in a stiffly normal pose, which is slightly odd considering their passionate and tumultuous relationship. Kahlo painted this for a friend of theirs, Mr. Albert Bender, who was a Rivera patron and actually helped the couple enter the country despite being denied visas because of their communist affiliations. Frida always hoped one day to give Rivera children. However, she suffered many complications conceiving and miscarried multiple times, likely due to her bus accident. This painting is called Henry Ford Hospital, named after the hospital in Detroit where they were living at the time. This was done in 1932. And it shows Frida laying in a hospital bed, bleeding, and represents the operation involved with her miscarriage. This painting highlights Kahlo's more surrealist style. She uses different symbols, such as a snail, to represent the long duration of the operation, as well as the long time it took for her to conceive in the first place. She also uses an orchid to represent the uterus, and the red ribbons connecting everything to her represents umbilical cords. This is also noted to be the first painting of Kahlo's where she uses sheet metal as the support in the painting itself. This painting I saw with someone's background, a very famous Kahlo painting. This is called The Two Fridas. As I mentioned, Frida and Diego had a troubled relationship that was rife with outside affairs. They kept separate but adjoining homes in San Angel where they lived. They even divorced in 1939 but got remarried in 1940, so that just shows how up and down the relationship was. This painting was done in 1939, just after they got divorced, and it shows two versions of Frida's personality side by side, both with the hearts exposed. And they're holding hands, symbolizing their interconnectedness. On one side, in white, Frida's dressed in traditional Tijuana costume, which represents the version of herself that Diego loved. This version has a broken heart that you can see bleeding down the white dress. And the other Frida shows her in a modern, more European-style dress. Kahlo admitted that this painting represents her desperation and loneliness due to her separation from Diego. So overall, Kahlo is labeled as a surrealist, but at least in my opinion, some surrealist artists, you look at their work and it's hard to decipher what they're trying to communicate. But Kahlo conveys very real and understandable versions of surrealism based on the tremendous hardship that she faced in her life. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Does anyone have any questions? All right, doesn't look like it. All right, definitely very interesting art. I think we've seen a lot of her artwork represented, particularly in artifacts, particularly around the Day of the Dead time, right? You see more and more things representing some of her art. So I think.
AJ, excuse me, this is Peter. Can I ask a quick question?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
So surrealism, magic realism, which I think of, not being an expert at all in either of them, as being something later and maybe more literary than visual. Just curious, what is the sort of connection there? Was she also an early magic realist?
I would have to maybe go a little bit more in depth to that. I didn't see anything with her in relation to magic realism. I can look into that and get back to you on that next week.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks, Peter. You always have interesting questions to ask. That's great. I think next week we're going to do a silhouette artist, right? A black and white, which will be very interesting. Sarah Williams.
Yes, I think so.
Great. Okay, excellent. Hey, thank you, Sarah. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Art talks have been very, very popular.
Yay. Yeah. Glad you're all enjoying.